You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we welcome Chris Collins to the podcast to talk about the role ABA can play in clinical settings and general education to support inclusion. Chris is the founder of a Florida-based nonprofit called ABAID, that's AID, Suncoast. The nonprofit helps families get access to the care they need in the settings they need it. There are often barriers to getting ABA in the school system. Back to school is in full swing, so we're incredibly excited to talk with Chris about this topic. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get to your background first. It's always fun to hear about the stories of what brings somebody into, and you're in such an altruistic field, of trying to help people to gain access to such a needed care. But what brought you to the field of autism?
So I started as a VPK teacher at a nonprofit preschool, at an inclusion preschool, and I really fell in love with the field. It's not something that was completely foreign to me. I grew up with a mom who was a teacher of ESE. I volunteered a lot of my time coaching soccer for children with disabilities and babysitting and things like that for those families. So I always kind of had a passion for it. But once I was in the classroom, working with a couple of our kids with autism, and my first kind of foray into ABA was completely by accident. I was implementing a token economy in my classroom. I thought, this was the greatest idea since the wheel that I came up with. And then I found out, it's a pretty fundamental tool in the ABA field. And so I had someone, kind of mentor me and tell me about ABA, and I was super interested in it and kind of went from there, became an RBT, and just saw kind of the need that was there for just include how useful it is in inclusion classrooms firsthand as a teacher. But also, I am a step parent. My child has autism and was in an inclusion class himself. He's now at an ABA clinic most of the day. And so, I feel as though now I can kind of tell this story from several perspectives. I've been a provider, I've been a teacher, I've been a parent, and I've been a fundraiser for these services. And so, I like to say I have a full picture.
Yeah, no, it's oftentimes amazes me is how often people who have direct connection and direct experience and that passion, how much that drives innovation. And it probably starts with seeing gaps, is that you like you said, we're in diagnostic pre-Ks. And as much as we hope to resource schools, is that there's always going to be a gap between what you hope to be able to do and what you can afford to do, whether that's a school or an individual. So what in the school setting were you looking at to say, there's something missing, or, if we resource this differently, that we'd have a better opportunity for the children to really experience inclusion?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things I saw, with in Florida with the school system. They do employ behavior specialists and behavior techs, but it's not really ABA. It's most of the things they do are not behavior analytic in nature, but they try. But it's just a personnel and resource issue, I think, at the end of the day. But that's a very big problem, and so I kind of focused my efforts initially on private school settings, which most of these are nonprofit schools that also don't have the resources to have behavior specialist or any kind of behavior practitioner, but they might outsource it to clinics and such. So finding the personnel, but also, there are so many children in those preschool settings and elementary school settings that don't have, we'll call it the magical ICD-10 code that's going to get them insurance to pay for their behavior services, and to see something again as simple as a token economy have such a powerful influence on an entire classroom of children, ranging in abilities. Some of these children are typically developing. Many of them might have a developmental delay, but haven't been diagnosed yet. That's the nature of the preschool setting, is a lot of them haven't been diagnosed, but they could benefit from it.
Mhm.
So providing resources to those preschools and schools and settings that maybe wouldn't have access to it otherwise, in particular the kids who, um, like I said, don't have that diagnosis that's going to get insurance to pay for behavior analytic services.
Absolutely. And I think this is an age-old question is, we oftentimes know what that gold standard is. Oftentimes we know what we want to provide to our children, and those resources, they cost money. So with your nonprofit, what's unique about the structure of how you're trying to be able to fill this gap that might be something that could be replicated?
So I'll give an example of one of the programs that we're running now, because for a short while, I was working on authorizations for ABA clinics across the country, some in Illinois, some in Michigan, some in Florida. And something I saw from the evaluators who are working on these, whether they're BCBAs or social workers that are approving these hours and these authorizations, is I would see things get kind of checked off as, oh, that's not medically necessary. That's not medically necessary. And so how can we get those types of services that might fall under the beneath the threshold of what they consider necessary? While I would argue that this program is medically necessary, we have a program called the Aversive Activities of Health and Wellness, where we really just have set up a dental clinic, a mock kind of dental doctor's office, barbershop kind of three-way combination. You got to make best use of the space you have, but that costs money. That's capital that not all ABA clinics have, and we were able to connect donors who felt passionate about that and saw that one of the most basic things I think as typically developing individuals maybe we take for granted is the ability to go to a dentist. And as much as we might hate it, we do it and we sit through it and we power through it, but so many kids can't. And I was fortunate enough to be able to tell this story to the donors from a personal space, which was, every time I was taking my 5, 6, and 7, like however old he was at the time, 5-year-old was when it started, he was getting put under for teeth cleanings. And like, that's no way for for a young child, autism or not, for a young child to have to endure that, because it was so aversive to him. And so we have this, desents program where these kids are learning how to, find those activities of health and wellness less aversive and to be successful, in a controlled environment first. And then obviously the hope is always that they'll generalize it to the real deal. And part of that too, we actually have partnered with a local dental school. So those students are coming in and doing teeth cleanings to the clients. So it's kind of a win-win-win for everybody involved in that regard, because they're getting exposure to children with disabilities who they're going to run into out in the real world. And the more of those types of dentists we have, maybe there'll be less need of the desents clinic that we've established.
No, I love
But
that two-way street that you're describing, Chris. I mean, it's not always on the family to try and figure out the solution. Is that we have to empower the stakeholders in the community, and what you're doing is creating the opportunity for that child to actually benefit from normal daily living opportunities and start to develop those skills, because we all know is that without proper dental hygiene, without proper medical care, without being able to take care of yourself to be to feel good about yourself, whether that's a
yeah,
haircut or whatever it may be, is that it deteriorates parts of your life and it takes away from some of the enjoyment that you can have in other aspects. So I think that working with your community is probably one of the best ways to do it. How do you talk to, and who are you going out to find these resources from? Because like you said, they cost money. It's not coming from your medical benefits. Who's out there? Who's helping you?
So there are private and family foundations and community foundations, and these are nonprofits established by folks who want to give back, who want to be philanthropic. Um, and just finding them is as simple as just Googling, such and such your area and a community foundation, and those those places will pop up. And the community foundations in particular, they have a collection of donors and typically a pretty large amount of assets that they manage and make grants and make scholarships and all of those things. And then for what I've done is, to provide that access to the clinics is I've, registered 501(c)(3) so that it meets all the requirements that a community foundation and private foundation need to be met by the IRS, and what governs all of that, and what's tax deductible, and who can receive a gift, and everything. And so that's kind of been the model by which I've gotten this off the ground. You know, I'll call it a private and philanthropic partnership. It's like kind of meeting those two industries, for lack of a better word, together, because you know there are resources out there. It's just like knowing how to access them, knowing how to ask the question, knowing who to ask the question to. Um, but usually, I've noticed that people want to help out. It's just getting the story out there.
No, absolutely. And I mean, this is a way where you have direct impact into what's going on. And I think that that discrepancy is important for everybody to look at is there are certain things that a medical plan will pay for. They're going to pay for very specific components of a treatment plan. But some of these daily living skills, some of these academic and classroom skills are things that you're battling over. And whether or not you should have to battle over it and whether or not you should have to go into appeals process with your insurance company, that's for a different show. But what you're talking about right now is filling that gap. And in the classroom, what are some of these ABA benefits that people might not be receiving from their insurance company that are accessible in the classroom that maybe we can help to resource through philanthropic donation?
Yeah, I think with the classroom in particular, and kind of what ABA has been doing, is it's really more of a professional development model. It's so expensive to try to outfit every room with a behavior tech, or every school with a behavior analyst. But what we can do is give teachers the tools that we use every day as behavior analytic practitioners, and that is bringing it back around to the token economy. My favorite thing. It's something so simple that anyone can do it. Anyone can implement that in their classroom. And when you're talking about creating a more inclusive classroom, is what can we do that doesn't single out a student for their accommodations. And that's what I've always loved about little token boards, is that you can give every child a token board. And in fact, that was inspired by a teacher that I knew, and she was working towards becoming a BCBA, and she had two children in her class that were nonverbal. Everyone else was more or less typically developing, and she had all of them have a token board. And I thought, why don't we just do this in more classrooms? Let's start giving, let's show every teacher out there the benefits of having that visual schedule.
Mhm.
Let's show them the benefits of antecedent manipulation. Just and educating them on what is this behavior attention maintained, or is it automatic? All of those things that you learn in the clinic, and or as an RBT or BCBA, that I don't think is a huge time commitment for teachers, but I think it pays huge dividends. So, what's not to love about that? It's a small time commitment for big results and big impact.
Absolutely. I mean, ABA in the real world. I mean, it exists, and it's not just for autistics. It's for everybody, and we all benefit from positive reinforcement, being recognized for specific things that we're doing well, that we're challenging ourselves with, so we can see, I feel good about achieving this goal. I move forward, or my effort was high. So when you're looking at that idea of inclusion, because you've mentioned it several times now, and you've seen it through your time working in the schools, from your time as a stepdad. what is it that you're seeing as so important with inclusion with a child's developmental growth that the investment is worth putting this extra funds to?
So, I'll actually bring it back around to something you said a little bit earlier, which was people getting involved in this field. It's because they had a connection to it at some point, right? And I think, there's not a ton or any literature out there that I've found that I would love to start, maybe seeing how many people are working in the special needs field because they were exposed to it at a young age, or they have a loved one who, a nephew that's on the spectrum, or a brother that has Down syndrome, or uh, an aunt that taught special education. Because I guess that there's a lot of us that we didn't we didn't plan this from a young age. It just kind of feels like it was thrust upon us for one reason or another. Um, and so I think, those benefits can't be understated. And that's just as a community, as adults, that's how it impacts, the teachers, the typically developing peers, that they are taught empathy and acceptance and inclusiveness. And uh, as for the children themselves, who, like my stepson, for instance, is, you know, it's hard to understate the development that happens with powerful peers, powerful speech models, articulation models, behavior models. I mean, just having that, a group of students at your table uh, that are not like you with autism, not, doesn't have the same obstacles you have, and they can show you, what it looks like to attend to a lesson. And that in turn allows that child to succeed. And that's what we want, is the highest level of independence for those kids. And I think those typically developing peers can help them achieve that, probably better than any of us can as therapists and teachers. The peers are the ones that really do the legwork and have the biggest impact.
Absolutely. I mean, it's super insightful, the fact that, I mean, when you're looking at building a community that demonstrates empathy, has social awareness, is inclusive, is that, the way to do that is to create an environment where they have the opportunity to practice that. So not only are you benefiting the individual who you're trying to create an inclusive environment for, but you're actually creating that inclusive environment and benefiting everybody who needs to learn that skill, which it's not something that inherently is brought out by our society right now. Is that sometimes you have to create these opportunities and teach it and help people to experience it. So I think I mean, I see where you're coming from, and there is the byproduct that ideally is that you have a lot more helpers in this world, because they've learned it at an early age how they can be impactful for their community. When you're looking at, how to be able to empower or resource so that inclusion actually works, one of those things would be is finding out ways to include that into individualized education plan or an IEP. So how how do you incorporate some of those ideas to make sure it's matching up with the funding that you can do at the school to say, hey, you know what, we can help resource this particular component, or we can be there for that so that we can help to meet your educational needs?
Yeah, so it's really difficult if we're talking about, the IEP in the education setting, because um, it's unfortunate to say, but no amount of philanthropic support is going to provide the public schools with what they need to really create that least restrictive environment for all of the kids who need it. But, with our smaller schools and private schools, and I just also want to add, with a lot of these specialized schools, they might have an IEP, but they're not bound by the same laws that our public schools are. And so students leave for all kinds of reasons, better therapeutic services, smaller classroom sizes. But those parents give up something. They give up that rights law. They give up the ability to hold the school accountable. Now, conversely, it's sometimes less of an uphill battle. Those schools are more likely to try to find the therapies that they need and contract out therapies with other providers. But there's no legal recourse that they have, which is something that I've been working with, not just through this nonprofit, but through my day job, is, getting these schools the resources they need, the teachers the resources they need, so that they can make sure that these students have everything they need. And there's no need for a legal recourse. There's no need to be obligated through law, but they're obligated through, I don't want to say a sense of duty, but that they can do it. It's achievable. It's right there for them. They have the supports they need.
No, and I think that's the first step, is being able to kind of create the open dialogue, identify those resources, and to have a working relationship. As soon as it becomes adversarial, now people have their guards up. They're not willing to try new things. They're not willing to accept the additional training because they feel like there might be a watchdog over what's happening, versus saying, well, let's work together to make something better. It might not be best today, but better. Let's incrementally get there. So what do you recommend to families as they're about to head back to school? And I mean, all of us want to make sure that we're providing the best opportunity for our children. We want to be able to create the inclusive environment that you're creating for your stepson. It's that we're trying to be able to do everything we can to make the world around them accepting. So what do you suggest for families through this process?
Well, I think I should probably take my own advice. So I'll use my partner's advice that she gives me at the beginning of every school year with our stepson. Is she says, Chris, be patient with these teachers because they're trying. I mean, it's about balancing, um, asserting yourself as a parent, advocating for your child, but showing some compassion for the teachers also, and being flexible. And I think at the end of the day, as a parent, if you just remind yourself, we want the same thing. The teacher, the principal, administration, the therapist, we all want the same thing, which is what's best for the child. They have a lot of children in their view. You have your child, so I would say, just being patient, but also not afraid to advocate for your child's needs either.
Yeah, I mean, creating that team and that trust within the team, I think is very important from step one of the educational process. So where can people, I guess I'm going to make this a two-part question. First of all, where are your services found? And then secondly, where can folks like myself who are looking to understand what could increase the value of some of the opportunities out there and replicate some systems and understand how we can make your system even more scalable for even more families? What, I guess, where's that information housed?
So if you go to abilitytoinclude.org, it will redirect you, but we're in the middle of changing our name. But it will bring you to the website that has all of our pilot programs. And to your second part, I will be making everything that we do accessible to anyone who wants to replicate it in their area, from the kind of directions and the model that we followed, and also publish the results, with identifying information redacted, obviously, but just something that other people can then use to, leverage funding of their own, or convince, their bosses that this would be a worthy project to do with their clinic or their school. And all that will be found on abilitytoinclude.org. And also, if this is something that, our region is Sarasota and Manatee County, so that's in Florida. But if you're looking to do something similar in your area, feel free to reach out and I will help. I think that's probably been the most useful, tool at my disposal. Has been, I don't really care about the nonprofit in and of itself. Like, I've been very open with working with people. I don't need to be the fiscal sponsor. The money doesn't have to flow through. And you run into that a lot with nonprofits. People keep track of their scorecards, how much money they raise, and their programs. But I don't care about that. I care about the community. Um, I was born and raised in this area, so that's kind of always been my goals. I want to see a prosperous Sarasota Manatee County. And if you feel like that about your region, feel free to reach out, and I can just kind of freely consult you, let you know where to find stuff. That's always been a talent of mine, finding the resources out there for those who would like it.
Well, I appreciate all the work that you're doing on this, Chris, and trailblazing a process through this. Is that opening up these opportunities for kids to be able to get a haircut, to be able to tolerate dentistry, to be able to do a variety of things, but then also to be able to start to create more community around the schooling opportunities, and potentially in the future, maybe even bigger components as far as opening up community activities, restaurants, things like that, where we can really start to help to tailor an idea of inclusiveness and awareness. Is that I think that the idea starts, and the more that you communicate about it, I think it's going to start to spread, and we're going to see all the fruits of your labor really pan out, not just in Sarasota, but everywhere. So I appreciate you coming on today to start that dialogue.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out to me and having me on.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like Autism Spectrum Disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.